Hello and welcome back to Bookish Theories! In today's video I would like to talk about the concept trailer of Tomorrow by Together's The Chaos Chapter Freeze, focusing on a little breakdown and analysis of the video and what it can tell us about the upcoming comeback. Now, with the release of The Chaos Chapter Freeze around the corner, Tomorrow by Together released a concept trailer titled Fight, Flight or Freeze, which is the video that you should show to anybody who is not a MOA so that they can become a MOA as a result. Now, the title of this trailer is actually a reference to a person's natural response to danger. When we come across something that can potentially threaten our safety, the body reacts with a series of unconscious decisions that are meant to protect ourselves in response to a sudden attack. We can either fight the danger, run from it, or freeze in fear, and as we'll see in a second, the video shows us the boys doing all three one after the other. One thing that is important to point out, however, is that even if these three reactions are considered natural responses to danger, in the context of the video, freezing may not be as natural after all, because if in the trailer we see them fighting the cold and running from it, them eventually freezing over is not a reaction to the threat, but rather a consequence of them failing to escape it. Now, as Subin's shirt rightfully points out, the danger that the boys have to survive this time is none other than the end of the fucking world, which is an event that will presumably involve chaos taking over and that starts with the boys themselves. Now, that shirt is also a reference to a show with the same name that might actually help us understand the general premise of how the story will unfold. In the series, a boy who thinks he is a psychopath starts dating a girl with the intention of killing her, but as they run away together, the boy starts having feelings for the girl, which is something that he never experienced before. Now, right off the bat, this is an interesting callback, because what this reference might imply is not only that the boys will literally face the end of the world, but also that their love for one another might actually be the key to overcome the most dangerous side of themselves taking over. As I mentioned in my past videos, the beginning of chaos seems to overlap with their monstrous side essentially coming to the surface. As we'll see in a second, this is something that the video itself actually hints at in the second half of the performance, but the real giveaway that love is the answer here can actually be found in Nap of a Star, where Yeonjun is eventually saved by Hyunin Kai at the lowest point of his journey. As Crown itself foreshadowed, that reunion leads to them accepting themselves and seeing the side of them that they hate as something beautiful, but getting there is easier said than done, because with chaos taking over, the boundary between fantasy and reality is becoming thinner than ever. You see, what the video is showing us here is the game concept literally coming to life. As we saw back in the Doom's Night, the end of the world is caused by the game that they were playing as children, essentially turning real and taking place in the real world, and a very similar shift can be seen in the video as well. At the beginning, for instance, we see the boys in an arcade playing a video game that they end up losing. Before they get the chance to start over, however, snow hits bomb you over the head and ice starts creeping in on the walls, freezing everything on the spot. When the video cuts to them escaping the arcade, however, their fight or flight response is activated in the most epic way possible, because instead of a natural reaction, the boys end up developing abilities that we never saw them having before. This is a very fitting concept to what we saw back in the Doom's Night, for instance. When the boys were attacked by the two dark entities, we saw Yeonjun defending Hyunin Kai out of instinct, and we know that it was an instinctive reaction, because in the video, Yeonjun himself was surprised by what he was able to do. Back then, his powers showing up were a natural response to the danger that was threatening Hyunin Kai, and something similar is taking place in the trailer as well. Now, this parallel here makes me think that the ice attack might actually be seen as the world of fantasy creeping into the real world and the virtual reality of the game merging together with reality. Much like the characters of a real-life game, the boys are incredibly strong. They are fast, they can do stunts, and they can survive things that a normal person wouldn't be able to survive, but the real giveaway that reality is becoming a game can actually be found in the setting itself. If you look closely, throughout the video, their surroundings tell us what is taking place in the story. When they're playing in the arcade, for instance, the video tells us that that's their amusement, but when the real game begins, the mode tells us that it's time for action, so they run away and we see Bongyu destroying the ice with a punch. When they start freezing on the other hand, the mode tells us that they're the champions of this game, and the environment responds to their need by providing them jackets in order to protect themselves from the cold. Once they are fully equipped, however, the real attack begins with a shard of ice flying over, and the environment tells us that they are the targets of this attack because we see a literal target in the background. When they run, the mouse says to run fearless, and when Taeyeon escapes, the environment tells us it's working, so much like a game, the audience can see the action spelled out on screen, while the action itself is being performed by the player. Now, another interesting detail to point out about the setting is that the mall might actually be a reference to the third season of Stranger Things, which is a show that was already referenced in Can't You See Me and that has many elements in common with the storyline as a whole. Much like the kids in the show, when the boys are children, they play Dungeons and Dragons, and in the VR version of Blue Hour, we saw that they play with classes belonging to that game. Back in the Japanese Runaway, on the other hand, the Chaos chapter was already foreshadowed by showing the boys in an arcade as the sky turned red, like it happened in the second season of the show. In both stories, the two worlds merged together, creating a lot of problems to everyone involved, and the main villain of the show is a cosmic entity called the Mind Flayer that wants to take over the world. Now, the interesting thing about this creature is that much like the danger that the boys are fighting in our story, the Mind Flayer is a monster that can have a physical form, but that can also possess the characters in order to make them do its bidding. This is a very fitting comparison here, because in the trailer, the cold is an enemy that does both as well. It's an external danger that the boys have to fight, but also a cosmic danger that ends up taking over their body and minds. And if in the third season of the show we see the characters facing this creature in a mall fittingly called the Star Court, in the second season, Will is taken over by the darkness in a very similar way to what we saw happening to Yeonjun in the Doom's Night. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think that the trailer might not only be showing us the moment where the game comes to life, but also the moment where the boys make the pact with the odd-eyed cat because of that. Much like in the Doom's Night, the video shows us that Ice isolates Yeonjun from the others. In this context, he's singled out by the enemy, and even if he manages to reunite with the others, in order to accomplish this task, Yeonjun has to channel a power that he didn't show before. Now, this is something very similar to what happened in the Doom's Night, because in order to defeat the enemies, the boy is called to a greater power that comes at a greater cost, and I think that the same thing is taking place in the trailer as well. In order to save himself, Yeonjun has to take a huge risk, and much like in the Doom's Night, the burden of making this choice eventually falls only on him, because the others are powerless and he is the only one that can make this decision. In both cases, the video shows us that Yeonjun eventually succeeds, but if in the Doom's Night we see that the price that he has to pay is turning into a monster, the trailer foreshadows that in this case he might have chosen the devil's side as well. As Yeonjun is about to jump, for instance, we can see two tattoos on his skull, one of which portrays a frozen heart with 3 swords going through it. Now, this symbol here is actually very similar to the 3 of Swords, which is a tarot card that on a general level indicates heartbreak, loss, and grief. This is a symbol that can represent a painful experience, emotional sorrow, or even betrayal, and back in the Doom's Night we saw that Yeonjun experienced all 3 because the pact with the cat not only backfires but also causes intense physical and emotional pain. Now, in the trailer, this concept is actually expressed with a sudden change of choreography, because if you look closely, when Yeonjun lands on the ground, his pose is very similar to the pose of the puma, and this is very important because, as he said himself, the puma represents the devil's side freeing itself. Much like what we saw in the Doom's Night, where the curse of the cat starts with Yeonjun and then eventually spreads to the others, when Yeonjun joins them, the entire group starts to behave like a pack and become more aggressive. On top of that, when the boys start to dance, their new power is also shown visually, because on the ground we can see a magic circle appearing under their feet. This might be an indication that much like the Doom's Night, the trailer is showing us the game turning real and the boys making the pact in order to become powerful enough in order to win it. Much like in that video, this new power is able to defeat evil for a while, but soon enough we also see the cold taking over, and I think that the reason why this might be is because they allowed it in by making the pact with the odd-eyed cat. If you look closely, chaos officially begins after Yeonjun punches the ice and he falls. This choreography ends in the very same way it ended when they first announced the Chaos chapter at the Melon Music Awards, so this parallel makes me think that him winning this battle might also overlap with his literal downfall. Since they allowed the devil's side to take over them in order to defeat the devil's side itself, Ice is now able to freeze them. They turn into monsters, and the darkness that they were trying to fight eventually becomes a part of themselves, but as we see in the video, this curse can also be broken, and this is where Moa comes into play. Now, as the boys confirmed in the fan live, in the story, Moa played the role of the star, and much like what we saw in Napova's star, her light is able to bright the darkness and make them reunite when the chaos breaks loose. As I mentioned earlier, love is the only thing that can melt their frozen heart, but if the boys love each other very much, the origins of this love is none other than the star, which is why we see Yeonjun eventually melting when her light awakens inside of him. Now, as I mentioned in my past video, the concept of this comeback seems to have been loosely inspired by the Snow Queen, which is a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen when a boy is hit by the shards of a demon's mirror and his heart freezes as a result. Much like in our story, the only solution to this problem is the love of a friend that allows the protagonist to see the light and remember how beautiful the world truly is. So even if for now we don't know to what extent they might be using this concept, I think it's very important to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, this is a game, so chances are that this comeback will mainly focus on how the virtual reality merges together with the real world, but to know how this will play out, we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!